This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one.
No notes.
No notes.
This is a first.
Yeah.
You gonna be all right?
Yeah, I'll be all right.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See how long it's gonna be before you open your computer.
Yeah, probably. I'm sure we'll get to that point eventually.
Be a blank page?
No, it's okay.
Something to write on? All right. Well, April, this was brought to my attention, and I'll confess that I'm not as hip on some of the monthly identifiers that our people have put on us and forced us to celebrate different things for different months or different days. I'm not as probably educated on that kind of stuff as I maybe could be. But somebody brought to my attention that April is the month of the military child. So I thought it'd be a cool idea to, I don't know, shame our kids for the next hour or so and tell them why, maybe give them a peek behind the curtain of why they're all fucked up, and
yeah,
who knows?
Well, it probably has something to do with the two people that are sitting here on this podcast.
Yeah. I'll take partial credit at least. Yeah. How's that? I won't take all the credit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so I don't know. I just cruised around the Google machine a little bit.
Yeah.
Just to kind of get some conversation starters about military children and why they're maybe a little bit different than, I don't know, civilian type kids. And just for the purpose of conversation, I think that's probably the best way to distinguish between the demographics that we may be talking about is people who are not brought up in a military family. We'll just refer to them as civilian kids, and that'll give us a way to delineate anyways. But one of the things obviously that sticks out, I think the most, is if you just put in there military children, what are they good at or whatever, why are military kids different? If you throw that into Google, probably the first thing that's going to pop up is resiliency.
Yeah.
And I think for good reason. I mean, and we've probably got a laundry list that we can come up with of why that is. So what do you got?
So why do you think that is?
Well, I think the obvious answer is those kids they're more accustomed, I think, to change in their life.
Yep.
And that comes in a lot of different forms.
It does.
You know, so just generally speaking, just change. You know, how many civilian kids get the opportunity to be exposed to so many different things in their life, in their very young lives, and how many civilian kids have their dad go away for 6 months to a year at a time? How many civilian kids have to move a couple of times every year? I mean, Katie grew up in it, and I think she counted up the other day, she's moved 31 times in her life.
Yeah.
You know, she grew up in the military, and then she married into the military. I mean, that's not common. Yep. I mean, I know people who haven't left their hometowns.
Yeah.
So when you talk about just adaptability, that's part of that resiliency thing.
Yeah, well, I think the military lifestyle teaches some things to kids that grow up in that other kids maybe don't get until later in life. One is change is probably the only constant, right? Yeah. And you don't get that a lot when you kind of grow up in the same place and you run in the same circles with the same group of friends.
Yeah,
you know, for most of your life, which can make, you know, changes that do come up sometimes a little scary and overwhelming, like when you finally go to college and now all that stuff that has been normalized or that you've been used to for so long is going to shift. That can be really scary for some folks. I don't think it may be not as scary for some military kids.
Yeah.
Because they learn, like, dude, you learn at a young age a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast. You know, in some ways, I think that they have to be very self-reliant. Because when dad is gone for 6 or 12 months at a time, and mom's single man ops, you know, they've got to, especially once they get older, they've got some weight that they've got to pull to kind of keep everything on the tracks and moving in the right direction.
Maybe you get some extra chores or, you know, help mom out, watch the kid for a minute while I go to the grocery store.
You're almost forced in some respects, I think, into a little more independence because
Oh yeah.
You don't have two parents there. There's not, well, you wait till your dad gets home. Well,
Yeah.
dad's not going to be home for a fucking year. So,
Yeah, no, that's valid,
you
man.
know,
And in the pregame, we talked a little bit about helicopter parenting. We
yeah,
just kind of breezed over it a little bit, but that's a good point, man. Is a lot of those military kids who are, like you said, one of the parents is gone. That's an opportunity for them to exercise some of that independence and get out and try new things and
yeah,
learn how to figure shit out on your own. And that, man, that is such a huge advantage when you get into adult life.
yeah, absolutely. But the other thing I think I think it teaches a couple other things too, because when you're forced to move every 3 years, like we were, and sometimes even faster than that,
Yeah.
um, you know, I think some of that self-reliance or independence, like I think military kids have to figure out who they are very early in life and kind of what they're about. Like there's a certain amount of self-assurance that you have to walk into a new fucking school every 3 years.
Well, it's either self-assurance or it's malleability.
Yeah. And because you know, every time you move, you got to make new friends. You know, you kind of have to start over from square one. It's a new school, it's a new environment. And you can let that become overwhelming and difficult to deal with, or you can just kind of go, yeah, okay, well, I got it. I know who I am. It's cool. I'll find friends eventually and I'll find a group and, you know, whatever the case may be. So I think there's a little bit of self-reliance that comes with that aspect too. At least I noticed that with my kids, like a little bit of self-assurance and self-reliance. And it's not, it's not as big of a deal when they're younger. It really kind of starts to manifest itself more, I think, when they kind of start to get into those teenage years, that 12 and over.
Yeah.
Because that becomes a little bit harder to change social circles, you know, or make friends in new environments in that respect. Sports is a great way to do that, obviously.
Yeah.
But there's always, even in sports, right? When you're the new guy on a team, everybody's looking at you sideways for the first couple of weeks till they finally get to know you, or you prove your worth, one of the two. So, so I think that those are some of the advantages that they have. But also, it's like you and I have talked about, I think that they learn whether they recognize it or not. You know, we've talked about this on the podcast. You know, some relationships are seasonal and some relationships are lifelong. The lifelong ones are usually few and far between. And they learn that, you know, they pick up friends for a couple of years and then they move on to the next set of friends. And, you know, I think in some respects, our kids' generation in particular, it's a little easier for them to maintain some of those relationships that they've had in previous assignments because of, you know, they can get on a game with friends that they had at the last place or whatever, and they can kind of keep connected that way. But, I mean, I think it teaches a decent amount of resiliency.
Yeah, I think, you know, use the example of moving down here for my boys, and it was just my two younger boys. My oldest son had already moved out. They were 5th and 8th grade respectively. And those are two different times in a young man's life. You know, an 8th grader is starting to go through some changes. Girls aren't icky anymore.
Yeah.
You know, the 5th grader is still like, hey man, who we going to tackle on the playground today? Kind of thing. But I remember having this discussion with them. I'd gotten the assignment to come down here and I could have used the 7-day option and retired at Mountain Home. And it was Halloween that year, 2015. And we were out trick-or-treating with the boys and we were kind of walking between two neighborhoods, stopped in the middle of the street. And we'd been talking about this. This has been a discussion for the last 5 days in our house. And I finally just stopped everybody and said, all right, dudes, we've been talking about this. We've gone over all the pros and cons. And I looked at Caleb. I said, what do you think? Move to Phoenix, yes or no? And he goes, whatever. New adventure. Let's go.
Yeah.
I looked at Nikki, 8th grader. What do you think? I'm down. Let's do it. I looked at Katie and she just kind of nodded at me, and I called Ziggy Marlowe right there in the parking or in the middle of the street and told him we'd take the assignment. But the attitude those two kids had, you know, it's like, yeah, fuck it. Let's go. Let's see what happens.
I think sometimes too, in a lot of ways, military kids have an opportunity to be a little more well-rounded in a sense too, because they get to see other parts of the country or other parts of the world, right? They get to experience other cultures if they get assigned overseas, and they get some exposure that a lot of kids in the United States don't get. And dude, I'll tell you, I personally believe that any chance you can get, especially as a younger man, you know, like I've encouraged Daniel as he's working through his digital design and animation program for college to seek out opportunities and like go to Japan, dude, and do a semester in Japan on anime.
Yeah.
Because he loves anime and learn about that stuff, right? But
Yeah.
just go experience. The more you can get out of the country of the United States and experience other cultures and see how the rest of the world works, you know, just the better perspective you're going to have in life.
Yeah.
Like the larger the lens that you view the world through becomes, and it gives you a lot to fall back on. And in some respects, at least for me personally, having been all over the world, it gives me a greater appreciation for the country that we live in sometimes, you know, and appreciate the freedoms that we have.
Yeah.
And some of the things that come along with that. But yeah, I think in some cases they have an opportunity to be a little more well-rounded in some sense, just because they get to experience so many things. Like there's a big difference, dude, between growing up and living in Alabama for your whole life until you turn 18 versus going to all the different places that you guys did as a family, whether it was Alaska or Mountain Home or Seymour Johnson or Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, that's my story is I grew up, I would call myself a very sheltered upbringing, very small town, you know, didn't have a lot of outside stimuli, didn't have a lot of exposure to cultural things. And I mean, it was an 1.5-hour drive for us to go to the movies down the road. And so it was really cool though when you went on a date with a girl, because you knew I got 3 hours in the truck with you know, and plus 2 hours in the movie. But you compare that to the way that my kids have grown up, and they were born in Alaska. We moved to Alabama. We moved to Florida. We moved to North Carolina. We moved to Idaho. We moved back to Tennessee. We moved back to Idaho. We moved to Phoenix. And holy shit, how many people did they meet along the way? And you know, each one of those places had a different version of fun that we would get them in. Maybe it was soccer. Maybe baseball was big in Alabama, you know, for that youth age. And in Idaho, we went camping a lot, and we traveled and spent a lot of time out in the woods and really developed that relationship with nature and getting outside and all of those different things. You come down here to the city and gosh, man, it's overwhelming at how much. But I didn't hear a person, I had never heard a person until I went to basic training say that they didn't believe in God. And so here I am, like week 3 or 4 of basic training, trying to get one of my bros to go to church with us, because that was 2 hours out of the day that the TIs weren't yelling at you.
Yeah, it was a break.
You kind of got to walk 2 by 2 down there.
You like a human?
Yeah, they had cookies and orange juice, and we'd go down there.
Nobody was yelling at you?
We'd sing at the top of our lungs, and it was a chance for us to kind of release a little bit after being pent up for 6 days, you know?
Yeah.
And I was trying to get this one cat to go with us, and he finally just said, dude, no, I don't believe in God. And I'm like ducking under tables waiting for the lightning to strike. You know? But that's just an example of how a person who grows up in a very sheltered environment with not a lot of external stimuli versus a person who gets to travel around and see and meet and do all these different things.
Yeah. And a great example of that too was like when I was at Naval Postgraduate School, there was an Indian exchange officer.
Like the country of India?
Yeah. Country of India, who was a MiG-29 pilot. And he lived three houses up from me.
Did you get all the BFM secrets from him?
And there's no secrets.
No
it's
secrets.
Fucking MiG-29. It's like Club of Baby Seals, man. But his son and David were the same age, and they went to school together. Siddharth Ganapatharuju was his name. And Sid used to come over all the time, and we would go over to their house, and they would make us like standard, like authentic Indian.
Yes.
It was so good. Their food was so good. We had them over one time. Hilarious. I made a leg of lamb. I grilled it. The fucking grill caught on fire because I walked inside for too long. But anyways, it turned out okay. But it was awesome, man. And it was fun for me to get to talk to his father and understand a little bit about, you know, like the challenges that they faced as a military, and just, you know, being a MiG-29 guy, talking about differences between that and the Viper and things like that. But it was really cool exposure for David too, I think, to, you know, get a chance to have a friend and talk to a kid who I think he still communicates with on Facebook or maybe Instagram now. I don't know. I hear Facebook's for old people like you and me, but you know, and just even though we didn't go to India, get that culture, because, you know, one of the things that was cracked us up one time was we were sitting there having dinner one night. We were talking, and Sid's dad is like, he goes, man, he goes, I can't believe how you guys drive around here. And at first I'm like, what do you mean how we drive around here? You know, he goes, you guys follow all the rules. He's like people stay in their lane. They actually stop at stop signs. He's like, there's none of that in India. He's like, it's just a free for all.
That's awesome.
So it was just, it's, you know, they get, and my point in all that is just that they get some exposure, and it doesn't even have to be from other countries too. It's like you're saying, just exposure from people who maybe you grew up in a small town and now you're with somebody who moved from a big city, or vice versa, you know, in different beliefs and perspectives on life. So
we were I forget,
because it's a melting pot, man. The military in a lot of large ways a melting pot.
Just in that, you know, the circle that you and I had exposed our kids to a lot of different things. It's just the variety of people. But I remember in Mountain Home, I forget which one of the kids it was, but they had a friend who had born and raised in Mountain Home, Idaho, 10 minutes from the Air Force Base, had never been to the Air Force Base, had only seen the jets flying overhead. And so when we took him out there to the air show one year, he was like walking around with his mind blown the entire time. And my kids are just like, what? It's just an airplane.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just, I mean, we had how many family photos do you have on top of a fighter jet? You know, we've got years of these things stacked up. And then I got kids on my young boys soccer team who have never been to the Air Force Base.
Yeah.
It's 10 minutes away. And, you know, so it's just, I think it's, you know, it gives them a unique perspective on a lot of that stuff. One of the things, Katie and I parented our kids in a way that we always encouraged them open communication. Obviously, we tried to keep it age appropriate, but nothing was ever off limits for us to talk about. And I think that really encouraged them to be open and honest, especially with us. But I think that also encouraged them to be authentic in their circles of friends. And, you know, as they grew up, they were able to, regardless of where we moved or what environment they were in, they knew who they were. They were themselves because they worked some of these things out. They've had these conversations. And, you know, I have family members who they wouldn't play a movie in their house if it had curse words in it. They wouldn't let them play certain video games if there were violence in it. And I'm like, well, see, I want my kids to see that stuff so they know it's out there. I don't want them to show up at college on the first day and be like, what is this beer? Oh, crap, this is my favorite thing ever. You know, and expose the kids being exposed to that kind of stuff, I think really helped them so that when they do get in some of these different situations in life, they're like, yeah, okay, I've been there and I've done that. I've seen it. Yeah,
I do think that they get a greater sense of maybe who they are because they're forced to with the moving and all that stuff. But I think they're in some ways too, they're exposed maybe to, and I hate speaking in generalities, but we're going to talk in generalities all day. But in some respects, I think a little more adversity too, because, you know, it's different when you have, you know, not to say that it's easier, but because it's not necessarily, maybe both your parents work but when mom and dad come home every night, that's a different reality than when dad deploys into a hostile country and is being shot at on a daily basis and mortared on a daily basis. Yeah. And he's gone for 6 months. And in the back of your mind, you got to be thinking, is he going to fucking come home? You know, and how you deal with that as a child. You know, or as a parent, the one parent that's left behind, how you keep the wheels on the bus around those types of things or have those hard, you know, I think we're exposed in some ways as parents too, and our kids are exposed to maybe some more difficult conversations and faced with some scarier potential outcomes than your average kid is because of what we do day to day, you know? It's weird taking your kids at the age of, let me think about this for a second. So David was probably 8, Danny was 4, Carly was 7. You know, when we're at a funeral for an F-16 guy, you know, who got killed in Iraq, who David is best friends with his oldest son. And they've kind of in some ways grown up together because we were at pilot training together and then at F-16 RTU together. Then we went separate ways, but then we came back to Luke together. and your kids see that, and that's got to make it pretty apparent to them that, oh shit, the stuff that my dad does
it's dangerous.
It's dangerous, right? And then, oh, by the way, 2 years later, dad's doing the same thing. Dad's off to Iraq to go be gone for 6 months and do the same shit that just killed so-and-so's father,
And you, as a parent, you have to somehow convince them that, no, that was an accident. Okay. It's going to be okay, and Caleb was just down last weekend, and we were sitting in the back watching a ball game, and I got to telling him stories, and I went over, and my mom had gotten me a leather-bound journal, blank pages. It's about an inch thick or so. And I took it on a deployment in 2012. It was my last deployment. It was a 9-monther. And I took it with me, and I filled that sucker up. And I told Caleb, I said, here's some advice from an old guy. I wish that I would have done this more, throughout my life. I wish that I would have chronicled some of this stuff and captured it, because we started thumbing through it page by page. And I mean, every page brought up a new story, and he was captivated by it. Well, one of the things that I'd written down was he had written me a letter. Caleb had written me a letter, and I wrote that letter in my journal. And it was something to the effect of, "Hey, Dad, I'm playing football. I love you. I miss you, da da da." And he signed it, "By the way, do good at war." Normal kids don't write that kind of stuff, right?
To their parents.
Your regular civilian kids don't. And there's another one that I've got, and it's in a card. I think it was a Christmas card, or maybe it was just a letter, but I've got it saved. He wrote me a letter I was in country in Afghanistan when bin Laden was killed. And the letter that Caleb wrote me, like the next couple of weeks or whatever, it's a letter about him playing ball or, baseball, whatever he was doing. And then at the bottom of it, it says, I'm glad you captured, or I'm glad you got the boss of the bad guys.
Yeah.
Like, he's like 5 or 6 years old, and he understands kind of what's going on in a very big, large, overall scheme. He understands Dad's away. There's a boss of the bad guys, and we got him.
Yeah.
And in the particulars, whatever. But like, your civilian kids that grow up in a small town in Countryville, they probably aren't exposed to that kind of stuff. Like, the realities of life sometimes hit these military kids a little bit younger than maybe your civilian counterparts.
Yeah. And then on the flip side of that too, I think they're also exposed to like some things around camaraderie and community that maybe a lot of other kids don't get that are outside of the military. Cause you'd have First Friday, sometimes where all the families would come in, and
that's a good point.
We'd hang out around the bar, and everybody would hang out, or when on deployments, you see people chipping in to help. You got guys coming over in bags, flight suits, for those that don't know what a bag is, coming over in flight suits to help with something around the house from a different squadron, because we're all gone and mama needs something fixed.
I got my son a summer job one year because of that. The sister squadron went away, and he wanted some extra money. I said, start calling. I got a phone list here of all my bros in that squadron. Start calling their wives and offer to go mow their yard or take their trash out.
That's what I mean. I can remember taking David and Danny over to, neighbors' houses whose husbands were gone, and going, we're going to go mow their yard today, because she's on her own. She's doing it by herself right now. She's got 2 young kids, whatever the case may be. So I think they get exposed to some of that stuff too, that is just kind of unique to the environment that we're in, and, what we did day to day.
When you came home, let's say it was a Saturday, and your kids got up and y'all had breakfast and everything. You said, all right, boys, we're going to go outside and knock out some yard work real quick. Did your kids complain a lot about that? My kids never complained about it. They're like, okay, fine, let's just go. I think their attitude was partly Dad told us to, and partly, if we just do this and we do a halfway good job, we got the rest of the day to go do what we want. But that was something that I remember very clearly when my kids are growing up, is they still don't. Like, when Nikki comes over to the house, maybe I've got something really heavy in the backyard that I've been wanting to move for a few days. Hey, Nikki, come out here and help me with this real quick. All right, fine. They never complained about helping Dad out or helping Mom out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that, they're just exposed to some different things just by the pure force of nature of what we did, and the environment that they kind of grew up in. That's just a little bit different than what some other kids are exposed to. Because I don't know. I don't think there's too many professional businesses that everybody gets together on Friday and, goes to the bar and drinks and feeds the snake. And the Bushmasters, we had a big python, and we'd feed them on Fridays. The kids freaked out. It was awesome.
Yeah.
And and just doing those types of things, and just that sense of community, I think that just came from being in a fighter squadron.
Yeah.
That is kind of unique to that way of life. That is, you don't get it everywhere.
Yeah, I think our experience was probably very unique, and there's obviously going to be a lot of other very unique experiences depending on what service and what career field they may be in. But what if you're the military child of some infantry guys and living there on the base? You may be exposed to things like amputees. That's something that a lot of people you don't see that all the time.
Yeah.
And if you're a 5-year-old and you walk around and there's a guy with a fake leg like my buddy Matt, when you're 15 years old and you see that guy, it's not going to be that big of a deal. Whereas if you've never been exposed to something like that, you could, you end up staring or gawking or saying something dumb or something like that. And I know I'm speaking in generalities, but it's just that the different things that you could possibly see living in a military community versus growing up in Countryville your whole life.
Yeah, for sure.
Not a lot of amputees where I grew up.
No, or I would think too sometimes, like when after my buddy was killed in Iraq, we'd still have his 2 boys over all the time. And I just wondered sometimes, like, what was that like for my kids? Because they know, but so it's awkward kind of.
Yeah.
It's just different a little bit now, right? And so having to navigate those types of things in relationships and friendships at a really young age, I think can add some uniqueness and if they recognize it or not, through all of that, they're learning how to deal with adversity and they're building some resiliency skills, And so the other thing I would say too, that, and again, this is a generality, but I would say, and you can tell me if this is true in your family, but what I saw more than not amongst families that had more than one kid, let's say, is those kids were usually really close.
Yeah.
They're almost forced to have a greater bond in some ways with their siblings than I think other kids are because they have to rely so much on each other through.
That's the one constant that you have.
That's the one constant, right?
Yeah,
that's through the moves. There's still the siblings at home that you can rely on or talk to or count on. And so I think that the bond between siblings sometimes becomes maybe a little stronger. Because that is their constant, right?
Yeah.
That's their one true constant circle of friends.
Yeah.
That doesn't change.
I was laughing this weekend. I had tickets to this Final Four thing, the Final Four Fan Fest or whatever it was, down at the convention center. So I took me and Nikki and Caleb and Colin, our bonus kid. And I had Nikki drive. And he said, are you officially old? I said, what do you mean? He goes, this is the first time you've ever had me drive anywhere. I feel like your chauffeur. I was like, well, fuck you, man. I was tired. We just ate a lot and I was tired and I didn't want to drive. But I texted Katie and I said, it's like a mixture of a crew chief flight line, a locker room, and a fighter pilot bar in this car right now. Those kids were going off, talking all kinds of trash about all kinds of different stuff. And it was just a freaking comedy show all afternoon for me. But it made me realize that we always joked about our kids and how well they got along and how, when they all get together, when all my boys get together, which is not very often anymore, but when they all get together, I just sit back and watch, man, because to watch their bond as brothers and the shared experiences that they have and to watch them grow into young men and the way that they carry on with each other. They've had a brother text message chat going now for, 10 years or something. And Katie and I don't get into that. We don't ever ask about it. Every now and then it'll spill over into the family chat, but we kind of, we always encourage, hey, you guys, you're brothers, you guys have your secrets and you guys carry that and y'all have fun with it, and I think that the military children in particular are probably, like you said, they're a little closer with their bonds because that's the one thing that doesn't change in their life.
Yeah.
No matter where we go, no matter who we meet, no matter what classroom we're in, I come home to the same guys every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Because it's the one constant that they have through all of that change that they get exposed to.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, they're still on different paths.
Yeah.
You know, and just because of their age breakups or whatever it may be, unless you got like Irish twins or something, and you happen to be in the same class. But oftentimes they're having their own experiences, their individual arcs, as it were. But they always have that family dinner table to come back to every night.
Yep. Yeah.
That's cool.
And I think that's important.
Yeah. I had a thought. I was going to bring something up, and I can't remember what it is now. It'll come back to me.
Okay.
Maybe not. I don't know. It was, you know, one of the hot topics in society right now is diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And from a military child standpoint, holy shit, dude, you're exposed to a lot of diversity. Growing up in Countryville like I did, there was a black side of town and a white side of town, even in my childhood. And you didn't cross streams very often. And it was just the way it was.
Yeah.
You know, and then all of a sudden I go to basic training and I'm in a flight of say 60 people, and it's a 50-50 mix of a bunch of different people, you know, and at first it wasn't like uncomfortable or anything. It was just weird. It was different. It was something that I'd never seen before, as opposed to my kids who are exposed to this every day, everywhere they go, you know, and the different places, not only like we lived in Alaska, my kids lived in Alaska. They went to school with Eskimos. I'd never gone to school with an Eskimo. I mean, you're exposed to so many different things, you know, and I think that's very unique from a military child standpoint. Is you'll go to school for 2 or 3 years over here in Tennessee, and then you go to school for 2 or 3 years in Idaho. Those are two very different demographics of people, you know? So I don't know. Nikki is on a construction crew here in town, and it's all Mexican. They're all Latinos. Most of them are from the motherland. And they don't speak English. So Nikki's like, no, whatever. I'll just learn Spanish. And he did. He just started hanging out with them. And it's funny. We were talking about earlier in the pregame about people that we don't expect listen to the podcast. Yeah. Some of them listen. Yeah. Nikki doesn't listen to the podcast. My son doesn't listen to this podcast. But he said that there was I think it was when Alicia was on with the shame episode and we was telling the boner story. Nikki says he's out there on his construction crew, and all of a sudden one of the guys opens the door to the grader or whatever equipment he was running and goes, "Hey man, is this boner story about you?" And he said he like fell over laughing because I can't get my kid to listen to it, but this dude up in this freaking tractor is listening to it.
That's hilarious.
So random.
That's so funny.
Anyways, yeah, the exposure that the kids get to the different people, the different stimuli that they get to see, I think that's just unique, man. It's a unique experience.
And that goes back to like what we've talked about on that podcast too, right? Which is stay curious and don't be judgmental. You know, like don't be afraid to experience, you know, or to find out other people's perspectives, to be able to try to see the world through other people's lenses. Like it'll actually inform you and give you a better ability to make good decisions for yourself or to understand issues to a greater degree.
Well, that's great to say that, but what if you're a kid like me growing up who just doesn't have that opportunity? Yeah, I'm exposed to two things, and it's literally black and white. Yeah, that was it, and I'm not slighting on anybody. That was fact. Yeah, I was exposed to two things, black and white, and that was it. Whereas my kids have been exposed to all kinds of different shit. Yeah. My kids started eating sushi when they were 5 years old. Yeah, there was no sushi in Countryville where I grew up.
Yeah. No, I get it, dude. And you know, it was the exact opposite for me. I thought racism was something we talked about in books, and that was history with Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement until I went to Montgomery, Alabama for officer training school.
It's a different world down there.
It's a different world.
It is.
You know, and I didn't know what the other side of the tracks really meant until I got to Sumter, South Carolina, where there's
literally tracks
where black people live on the other side of the tracks and where white people live on the other side of the tracks.
And see, that's funny. You're a grown ass man going through that.
Yeah.
You're a grown ass man and you're being exposed to that for the first time. Imagine you being exposed to that when you're 8 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and how that would maybe informed you a little bit different or change your perspective and your outlook on things. You know, it's not black and white. You know, maybe there's still good and bad in places, but my experience in the military was, like you said it before, man, it's a melting pot. And it's so cool to sit down with a person who's of German and Japanese. This person got the call sign Axis because she was German and Japanese descent. It was awesome. But to hear her stories from her family and you know, the different things that you don't even think about. You know, one of my best friends may be from New York. You know, I've never been to New York. I didn't leave anything in New England. I don't need to go back. kind of mentality from me. But to hear him talk about his upbringing and traffic and just the different, it's so different. It's so eclectic, and it's really neat. I think now, especially looking back on it, had I not had those experiences, I'm not sure I'd be the person that I am today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the point, right? And I think that's one of the unique opportunities that military kids get over other kids, which is, kind of what we've already said, which is just that exposure to different things. I mean, because, if you've traveled this country at all, the different regions are different. They kind of have their own vibe to them. They, they have their own kind of internal culture and belief, and it's just every section of the country is just a little bit different. And so, I think all of those things are good. It leads to a well-rounded person.
Okay, so here's the cool thing, right? You're in Sumter, North Carolina, South Carolina. Yeah. Your kid's like 8 years old, and you move to Phoenix.
Yeah.
And you have to drop that kid in on a Monday morning. Here's your new classroom, buddy. Here's 30 new. You've never met these people. You don't know. When we moved down here, I remember Caleb. We were going to football practice. We had gotten in touch with a few people who had gotten in touch with this team local here in Surprise, and we're on our way to practice one day, and I could tell he was a little bit nervous over in the passenger seat. And I said, "Caleb, man, what's going on, man? You're usually, you make friends. Like you're the fucking class clown, dude." And he goes, "Oh, I'm not nervous about meeting the new kids. I'm nervous because it's 110 degrees out, and I'm dressing all black." Yeah. Like, he wasn't even worried about meeting the new people and going out to a football practice where he knew 0 people. That didn't even cross his mind. He was so used to adapting and just fitting in and being the new kid. And I remember when we moved down here, I told both of them, Caleb and Nikki, I said, "Look, dudes, by the end of the first day, you're going to have a friend. By the end of the first week, you're going to know the people in your class, and you're probably going to have 3 or 4 friends."
Yeah.
Like this is not that big of a deal, right? Just go in there and be you, and you'll find where you fit in, kind of thing. And how awesome is that when those kids get to be adults and they can join a team and they just know how to fit in, man. It's like we talk about this when we were talking about being teammates and being followers and leaders, is know your role in the team and execute that role at a high level. Those kids go in and they just drop right in, man.
Yeah, well, it's like you said, that it teaches a large amount of adaptability.
Yeah.
And an ability to just kind of flex with the situation and flex with the new environment.
You got so many experiences you can fall back on. And
instead of kind of lather, rinse, repeat for the first 18 years of your life.
Yeah. It really has been neat to watch the kids transition into young adulthood, and you see some of that coming out in them. And I wish that on one hand, I wish that I could take them back and show them how I was raised, because I think that even sometimes they sit around and my mom will start telling them stories about my upbringing, and my kids just sit there and they're like jaws on the floor. And I said, "See, I told you we ate what was in the deep freeze. We didn't go down to the supermarket and get whatever we wanted. There wasn't a sushi bar in Jong's Market.
Yeah.
There was, you go in there, you get your produce and you eat what's in the deep freeze. Hopefully you kill a deer, so you got some meat to eat over the winter." It's just so different. And the independence that I had and being able to go out and just be a boy in the woods a lot of times. And like you said, figure shit out, But on the other hand, I think that they've had such a unique experience moving around and being exposed to different things. Tyler has friends from way, way back, 2 or 3 assignments ago, that he still keeps in touch with over social media. And that's been a game changer for that generation.
Yeah, for sure.
But, to see them blossom into becoming young men, and how all of these different exposures that we gave them as younger boys are now starting to come out as some of their character traits and some of the things they're very good at. And they're starting to realize some of these things.
Yeah. Well, I think too, just because of the nature of it, in some respects too, you kind of learn at a younger age, I think maybe as a military kid, or at least have the opportunity to really distill down what's the things that are, you kind of learn what's more important than other things, maybe a little earlier than some kids do. So, you grew up in small Townsville, and I'm sure there's, because it's so small and everybody knows everybody's in each other's business. So, it's just the gossip. Yeah. Right. So, but that's it, right? It's the gossip about, so-and-so's daughter this week, and then so-and-so's son next week, or guess what happened with Farmer John, or whatever. Right. And all that stuff's so fucking trivial. Who gives a shit, right? What matter? It does. None of that shit really matters.
Well, but if that's all you're exposed to ever,
right?
Then,
but that's my point is because they're not they're exposed to so much more, and because they have to be adaptable and they learn resiliency, and change is the only constant. They kind of learn that some of that stuff just isn't like I don't need to get involved in that, right? Like what's important, what family is important, right? Building community, whether that's the community that you're in for the squadron that you're in at the time, or the community that you build around you. For some people it's church, the church community that you build from place to place, and how you fit into that, and how you serve in those roles or whatever, right? It's finding ways to, it's in some respects, it's finding opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. Every time you go to a new place, you got to find new opportunities. You got to create new opportunities, whether that's in sports or, church or, academics or groups after school, whatever that is, right? You have to constantly go out there and find new opportunities to create so that you can pursue whatever it is the interests are that you have. And you have to find ways to facilitate that for them as parents too, which can be difficult depending on where you go, because it's very different being in Phoenix, Arizona, and the opportunities that are here for our kids in Sumter, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's a good point.
Going from a city of, what is it, 5 million, 7 million with shit everywhere to a town of 30,000.
Yeah.
That's about, 100 years behind where we are here now. It's just different.
Yeah. No, how about, I see this in my boys across the board. I see them, the confidence to go up and shake a person's hand and introduce yourself. Like I know a lot of young men around this town right now that don't have that level of confidence.
Yeah.
They weren't brought up like that, or, they weren't exposed to opportunities to learn how to do that. Whereas our kids are just so used to meeting new people.
Yeah, that's true.
That is just not a big deal.
Yeah, it's not.
It's like, whatever, I don't know him. He's probably got a cool story. Let's go talk to him.
Yeah.
And I see it all the time. I mean, we were really big on, as our kids were coming up through school, we were really big on having them solve their own problems. And if you're having an issue with a teacher, you've gotten behind with a class, something didn't go right or whatever, go talk to that person. I'm not going to come solve your problems for you, because one of these days you're going to be an adult and I can't solve every problem that you have. I hate these fucking stories that I hear about moms and dads showing up to their kid's first job interview. But that kid's not learning shit.
So ridiculous.
You got to let them figure this stuff out, man. You got to give them an opportunity to fail and learn and move on, and I think that those, at least my kids, and I'm talking from a data point of one here. I think that I've seen it in my kids where the idea of going up and introducing yourself to a complete stranger is just not that big of a deal to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Pretty simple stuff.
Yeah, because you do it all the time.
Yeah, I've enjoyed. Katie has a really cool story too. She was a military brat. Her dad was a lifelong Marine, and her grandpa was a lifelong Marine. I mean, she comes from a military lineage, but her dad was XO and CO of a Marine squadron, Hornet squadron out in El Toro, California, down by Orange County, Irvine. And it happened to be that from 8th grade to 12th grade, she was in one spot, which is kind of unheard of in the military. And this 4 or 5 years that she was in one spot, and she really developed a lot of really strong bonds and relationships. Imagine that period of time in her life from maybe 12, 13 years old to about 17 or 18 years old. That's one of your most formative times, your youth and adolescence, and that transition into young adulthood, young womanhood in her case. The bonds that she created there in that high school and her church environment and the things that she got involved with, she still has a group text message with a bunch of these people, and she calls them her sisters, and they talk 2 or 3 times a week. I mean, so I think the point is you learn to, as a military child, you probably learn the value of a really deep rooted relationship early on in your life.
Yeah, I think so.
Because at any given time, dad could get PCS orders and we're moving to Montgomery, Alabama.
Yeah.
Which is what happened to her.
Yeah. Well, and along those same lines, I think one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, but I think is very true, is they learn sacrifice.
Yeah,
they have to give,
that's a good one.
They have to give up a lot at times because of what dad does.
That's right. And you don't get a vote, buddy.
And you don't get a vote. I mean, dad usually doesn't get much of a vote either, but they learn sacrifice. They have to sacrifice friends and relationships or opportunities that they've established for themselves where they are, or sports teams,
Yeah.
whatever the case may be, they have to sacrifice all of that because dad's got to go to the next assignment, or mom for that matter.
Well, how about let's just tie that big old knot up real quick and talk about what does that really teach you, man? In a lot of respects, it's teaching you to have a good attitude. You don't have any control over this.
Yeah.
Dad got an assignment. Like you said, dad probably doesn't have a lot of control over this. But as a military child, you definitely don't. We used to joke, we gave our kids the illusion of a vote. It's kind of like our democracy now, or republic now, but you have to go into these situations with a decent attitude or else it is going to suck. But if you learn to go into it with, like Caleb said, when I asked him, do you guys want to move to Phoenix? And he goes, yeah, sure. New adventure. Dude, that's a great attitude.
Yeah, it is.
That he learned, and he was in 5th grade.
Yeah.
And so what's that speak for, for the rest of his life? He goes, I don't know what's around the corner. Let's go find out.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great approach to have for sure.
Yeah. Regardless of what it is, an opportunity that comes up through work or college, the opportunity to move up the ladder, the opportunity to cross train into something different, in your professional life, opportunity for you and your significant other to maybe try something different in your relationship, whatever that may be. I mean, if you've got that attitude of, I don't know what it looks like on the other side, but I'm willing to go find out. That's huge, man.
Yeah,
that's huge.
Yeah. Well, you get the opportunity to explore new things and new places and, new people. And so I think that's a plus, it's a benefit for sure.
Yeah. I think we've talked a lot about a lot of the positive upside maybe, but I'm sure there's some downside too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Probably some loneliness at times, sadness for sure.
Yeah.
I never experienced this with my family, and I don't think Katie did, but there's probably some depression with military children, and it's probably very tough for them if they don't have strong parental guidance to help shepherd them through some of these difficult times. That was one thing that we always tried to do, is we tried to help them along, but if you're a military child who's experiencing all these things, but you don't have that positive influence from an adult or a parent, then that could yield a completely different outcome potentially. So there is downside to it too, I think.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think for any kid, it completely depends on the environment that they're growing up in and around, and how supportive that is, and kind of the level of communication and openness and honesty that comes with it. And I think it's tough as military parents too, to, depending on age, to know how far you go down rabbit holes to talk about different things, because obviously the maturity level plays into that. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, dude. I'm sure that there's a lot of loneliness. There's probably a lot of fear, because I mean, it's scary to change those environments. It's scary to walk into a new school. It's scary. And sometimes too, it's just a pain in the ass to have to start over.
Yeah,
all the time.
It is. I mean, it's a pain in the ass for us as adults.
I know. Well, I mean, I think about, like going to Naval Postgraduate School, coming off a 3-year assignment. I'm going to be there for a year, right? Well, how much do my kids really want to invest in that? Yeah, because they know we're only going to be there for a year.
That's that emotional equity.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then we go to PACOM, and we're in Hawaii, but we're only there for 2 years. Well, how much do you want to? But you get to learn to surf. You get to learn.
There's upside.
There's upside. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think those are all things that they all probably struggle with to a certain extent, and just the fears when, mom or dad leaves for deployment and what that's going to look like. And, have I said my final goodbye? Or I'm sure that.
I'm sure that's a tough one. How about this one? Dad just left on an deployment yesterday, and second dad is already sleeping on the couch.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen that movie play out a couple of times where, I mean, before the guy was even wheels up out of the airport, the spouse left at home was making phone calls, and random dudes are showing up at the house. What kind of message is that sending to your kids? And kids aren't stupid.
No,
it doesn't matter if they're 3 or 13. They're not stupid. Yeah. They know that that's not daddy.
Yeah.
Something is weird. Something's different here. And so if you are, if you grew up in Smallsville, and your dad doesn't travel, and you're, like in my case, my dad was a cotton farmer. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. We didn't go places. without each other. We went as a family. I mean, my dad would go to the hunting camp occasionally, but within a couple hours radius, we were at home almost 365 days a year.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to, you know, in the life that we lived and exposed our kids to, where every other year you're going somewhere for 6 months.
Yeah.
That's a very different dynamic there. And you know, I'm not even going to say for sure, but I hope that my wife didn't make those phone calls. And I hope that there wasn't, you know, Uncle Jimmy that came over and stayed for 6 months while I was gone.
Yeah.
But
well, unfortunately, my first wife did. So,
oh dang, sorry, man. I didn't mean
right.
I didn't mean to
It
bring
happens.
up bring up wounds, but yeah, I mean that exposed your kids.
Yeah,
you know, that just being part of that military family, that military dynamic, that exposed them to something that was not common to other people.
Yeah,
and I think that's, generally speaking, that's what we've been talking about for the last 50 minutes. Is the military kids are exposed to things that other kids just aren't.
Yeah,
you know, different stimuli, different experiences, different people.
Yeah, it's all about the exposure for sure.
That's cool, man. I'm sure we could talk about our kids forever. I got a lot of funny stories on mine, but
yeah. Well, and to all the military kids out there, thanks for all that you do. Thanks for muddling through it and supporting mom or dad to get, you know, to the next assignment and the next rank and all that stuff. Like, all that stuff matters, and you know, having that family bond as strong as it can be is what's important at the end of the day.
Yeah, it sucks because they didn't sign up for the military.
No, they
didn't join up.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something that was kind of in the back of my mind a lot of times. Was Katie knew what she was getting into because she was a military brat, and when we started dating, she knew the game, right? But how many spouses even marry into the military and have no freaking idea
what they're getting into?
And then the kids, they definitely didn't sign up for this. Yeah. They didn't sign up for PCSs every 2 years and 8 months. They didn't sign up for schools that only lasted 6 to 9 months. They, you know, I don't know. I think that just that in and of itself, in the end, on the back end of it, they'll be able to look back and go, you know what? I can appreciate the different things that I've experienced throughout my life.
Yeah.
Nikki, just a couple of weeks ago, well, okay, so here's a funny one. We're at the fanfare, at the Fan Fest or whatever, and they have this little booth that it's like they do the TV intros to a basketball team, and they say, and now, I don't know, whatever, here, and you stand up, and they got the smoke and shit. Well, they had one of those things staged, right? So I had the kids go over, and I said, I want to see you guys do this. Come up with something funny, right? So they went over there, and they wrote on the thing, they are from Team FML, and their registered height was 6.9, and they were from Titty Mountain, Idaho. Now, here's the funny part of it, right? So Titty Mountain, when we were driving from Mountain Home to Boise, about halfway, if you look to the south, this was our halfway marker between that 40-minute drive or so. If you look to the south, there's 2 little mountains out there with little towers on top. And the very first time that we were driving, I just happened to look out the window and I said, look, kids, it's Titty Mountain. And they're like, 5 years old or whatever. And from that day, it's been Titty Mountain. Well, those kids, though, here we are, fast forward 20 years, and they still
with them.
They still remember Titty Mountain.
That's
so
awesome.
So it's those little things that I think those kids will be able to take with them forever, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just having those experiences,
Yeah, and for the listeners, man, just don't miss the opportunity to experience something if you have that opportunity in front of you. Don't miss the opportunity to go on that adventure if you have that opportunity, or to experience something else if you have that chance, because
try new things.
Yeah.
Man.
I mean, those are how we create opportunities in lives. That's how we learn more about ourselves. Those are the things that are going to inform you, about yourself and how you view the world.
Yeah.
And exposure is a great thing.
Start to learn what you like and what you don't like. And, and that all goes into a little Rolodex, so that when you're an adult, you fall back on it and hopefully make good decisions and stay away from the shit you don't like and go towards the things that you do like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe along the way, you'll find your passion and you'll turn that into profit.
Yeah, there you go.
That'd be awesome. What else you got, man?
That's it, man. Be the change.
All right, be the one.
See, I don't need no notes.
Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.be1change1.com. That's be and the number one, change and the number one.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be1Change1 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.